Poštovani gledalci, dobrodošli u N1 intervju. Naš večerašnji gost je čovjek koji je radio za dvije američke administracije, Clintonovu i Obaminu. Bio je savjetnik dvojici američkih predsjednika, radio je Vijeću za nacionalnu sigurnost Sjedinjenih država, danas predaje na Univerzitetu Georgetownu u Sjedinjenim državama, ali isto tako je i ugledni član Council for Foreign Relations, odnosno Vijeća za vanjske poslove Sjedinjenih američkih država, uglednog think tanka. S njim razgovaramo o onome što se dešavalo proteklih nekoliko dana u Sjedinjenim američkim državama, ali i o onome što će se dešavati u budućnosti sa novom administracijom američkog predsjednika nakon 20. januara ove godine. Naš gost je profesor Charles Kupchan. Professor, welcome to program N1.
Very happy to join you.
Professor, my first question will be probably easy on wording, but very hard to explain. But my question is, what has happened on January 6th? What has happened at the Capitol Hill, and what the role was the president's role in all of this, and how would you describe those people who have attacked the core and heart of American democracy?
Well, in many respects, what happened on January 6th was a logical culmination to 4 years of the Trump presidency. A lot of anger and passion and emotion has built up in the United States. Trump is a very polarizing figure, and he has used falsehood and manipulation and social media to stir up a situation in which his supporters resorted to violence because they falsely believed that the Democrats had stolen the election and that Trump had won. That is untrue. All 50 states, red states and blue states alike, have certified the election. The courts have looked at the issue. There is no evidence to support Trump's claim, but his base relies on a set of information that comes from Trump and is retweeted, put out by the right-wing media, and that led to a situation in which you had a large number of his supporters descend on Washington. He gave a speech that effectively encouraged his supporters to march to Capitol Hill. And what resulted was a breach of security. It still remains to be seen why the Capitol Police didn't have more people there, why the National Guard wasn't there. We don't know the answer to that yet, but it led to one of the darkest days for American democracy since the nation's birth in 1789. We're now dealing with the aftermath of that set of events. Trump's presidency is unraveling before our eyes as some of his cabinet members and key aides resign. We can expect to see the Congress, the House, impeach Trump this week. Whether they then go ahead with a Senate trial remains to be seen. But this is clearly one of the most seminal moments in American history. One way or another, the Trump era is coming to an end. In my view, it could not come soon enough.
I said in my opening statement that you worked for two presidents, for President Clinton and for President Obama, and you advised both of them, and you work with the incoming president, Joe Biden. But when you look to the past, have you ever found any example of the president being such as Donald Trump, with all the mistakes which previous presidents have committed, such as Richard Nixon in '74 with Watergate, President Bush with wars in Afghanistan, in Iraq, President Johnson with the war in Vietnam, and other presidents with the Korean War or First and Second World War?
You know, I can't really think of an American president that rivals Trump simply on the basis of an individual who has lacked the basic qualities needed to run a country. And, you know, if you go back to the 19th century, you can find cases of corruption You can find some individuals who were populists, but just in terms of the lack of integrity, the reliance on untruth, the insults and vilification of the political opposition, I think that Trump is right at the top of the list. And in many respects, his presidency is the most consequential because it takes place at such an important moment in American history. You know, if we go back to the 19th century, the Civil War, the big debates between North and South, a polarized situation, the United States was not a great power at that time. It was isolationist. It was focused on North America and the Western Hemisphere. That's not true now. The United States, starting in 1941, became a global power. It ranges widely across the world. And as a consequence, the effect, the impact of having a president who is unfit for office is magnified. And that's why in the end of the day, I think this is in some ways the most costly presidency in American history. We wait with bated breath for January 20th, because I think Joe Biden will engage in the kind of course correction that the United States and the world needs to see. But one has to admit that irreparable damage has been done, and that the brand of American democracy that many people around the world have long looked to has been damaged and is in need of serious repair.
Before we move to the President Biden, let me ask you this. You wrote a book about isolationism. Donald Trump has isolated United States probably more than ever in the modern history of the United States, taking it out from a Paris Climate Agreement, WHO, also having fights with allies in NATO, also having fights with allies in Europe, especially in the European Union. Also going on hand to the leaders such as Vladimir Putin and Recep Tayyip Erdogan, maybe even in some sort to Xi Jinping. How you see in that way his term of the president?
Well, you know, as you can tell, I am not a supporter of Donald Trump, but I also think that we need to take seriously his skills as a politician and the degree to which he was tapping into a certain inward turn in the American electorate. I think for many Americans, the level and scope and reach of American foreign policy had become too much. For many Americans, there was too much world and not enough America. Too many wars in the Middle East, too much free trade, too many immigrants, too many international commitments. And so Donald Trump was elected in part because he said, I hear you, and I am going to focus on America first and spend less time and money and energy and lives on other countries. The problem is that when he came to implementing that political strategy, that instinct, he took a wrecking ball to the world that America made. Not only did he tarnish democracy and stand by the likes of Vladimir Putin and Mr. El-Sisi and other autocrats rather than democratic allies, he, as you correctly pointed out, was a unilateralist. He pulled out of the Paris Climate Agreement, arms control agreements. He left the World Health Organization in the middle of the greatest global health crisis since 1918. Makes no sense whatsoever. And so he simply took the United States down a very dangerous course. However, there are some aspects of his neo-isolationism that I think we will see continue. One is a continued retrenchment from the Middle East. He's not going to go rushing back in to Afghanistan, Syria, and Iraq. Number two, I think there'll be much more focus on the average American. Is foreign policy working for the average American? less willingness to open up the doors to free trade, and a much tougher stance on China, on intellectual property, on trade. So I do think that there are some parts of Trump's policy that will continue, but the most important changes that Biden will bring are, number one, we will have a real Democrat, a person of integrity and decency back in the White House. Number two, we will have a team player. He will go back to being a president who builds coalitions and works with like-minded states to address global challenges. We live in an irretrievably interdependent world. No country can go it alone.
Now, let's move to President Biden. Once he takes a power on at the noon on January 20th, you just said a couple of things which he will do, but can he make a change on the domestic scene? Can he find the same language to speak with people like Senator Mitch McConnell, who's the currently leader of the majority, but will be leader of the minority in the next Congress once the president takes over power? Can he find that unifying voice on the Capitol Hill, between Capitol Hill and the White House, especially because both him and Vice President Kamala Harris are senators in their pasts, and they know how the Capitol Hill works, especially Vice President Biden?
I can't think of anybody better positioned to reach out across the aisle than Joe Biden. And that's in part because those are his instincts. He's always been someone who reaches across the aisle. He believes in personal relationships. Number two, he has a long career in the Senate, in Congress. And so he has the relationships that you need, and he will work those relationships. Do I think that the Republicans will play ball? Are they going to become a more constructive actor? It's going to be a tough issue. And that's because Trump and Trumpism still dominates the Republican base. And as a consequence, people who are looking toward their next election are going to be asking, does it make sense for me to reach across the aisle and work with Joe Biden and appear to be cooperating with the Democrats? So I think we just have to wait and see on that front. The other issue that I think is key here is that in addition to reaching out to Republicans, Biden really does need to get at the underlying problems in the country that led to the Trump era. And those problems are deeply rooted. They have to do with economic insecurity. And so I really think that right out of the box, he needs to get through Congress, hopefully with the support of Republicans, if necessary without their support, and he does have a Democratic majority, infrastructure spending, an effort to tame the pandemic, worker retraining, healthcare legislation. He needs to address the basic desires, needs, insecurities that have caused the American electorate to embrace somebody like Donald Trump. It's a key top priority. It seems to me that is the number one issue that Biden should and probably will focus on.
His cabinet will be composed of many firsts. First Latino, first African American, first from India. Also, he's bringing some well-known names back to the cabinet, such as future Secretary of State, Tony Blinken, or future Director of CIA, William Burns. Also, he's bringing in Judge Merrick Garland, who was denied the chance to become Justice of the Supreme Court. So can that team really deliver what his agenda is, especially knowing that we know now that Senator Bernie Sanders will be chairman of Budget Committee at the Senate side?
Well, you know, I think that it's a good team. It's a seasoned team. we will go from a situation in which there has been a lack of expertise and a lack of policy to a team that knows how to run a large governmental organization, that relies on science and analysis, not on instinct and tweet. And so we will be going back to an American government that functions normally. I don't want to suggest that there will not be challenges. There will be challenges. And those challenges stem from the fact that the country will remain deeply divided, that there are a lot of angry people out there who will think that Biden is not legitimate and that Trump stole the election. Now, and it's for that reason that I think it's so important for Biden to deal with the deeper sources of political dysfunction. And I would add to the points I made earlier about spending on infrastructure, healthcare, manufacturing, worker retraining, the need to try to get a handle on social media, to prevent social media from spreading lies, to do more to prevent Russia and other countries from interfering in US elections. I mean, let's be honest here, the problems the country faces are homegrown. The country is divided. However, that internal division combined with social media allows countries like Russia to exacerbate the situation. So these are also issues that need to be addressed.
One of your functions at the NSC was to deal with Europe, and you did that for the both presidents, President Clinton and President Obama. You know Tony Blinken, who was at the same time as yourself at the administration, but also you know William Burns, who was for 40 years at the State Department. So how those two men, one will be responsible for the State Department, the other one will be responsible for foreign intelligence, impact the relationship of the United States with the world, especially with the Europe, where we know that for the last 4 years, Donald Trump had a lot of issues and a lot of broken relations, especially with countries such as Germany and France, and in some sort with the United Kingdom until Boris Johnson came to become prime minister?
You know, I think that there will be a major investment in the transatlantic relationship, coming not just from Blinken and Burns, but from Biden himself, and from Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor, and from other key members of the Biden team. And that's because everyone on this side of the Atlantic is aware of how much damage Trump has done. He turned his back on Europe. He saw the European Union as a foe of the United States. He supported Brexit. He's said he's going to pull troops out of Germany. It's been a train wreck. And I think the Biden administration will want to repair the relationship. Secondly, in many respects, I think the European Union and Europe writ large will increase in importance, not necessarily geopolitically, but politically. And that's because Biden and the people around him are aware of the fragility of liberal democracy. They are aware of the vulnerability of the unique experiment that Americans and Europeans have together advanced over the last couple of 100 years. And I think they will want to look to Europe to help refound and restabilize liberal democracy. And you also have in Biden a real Atlanticist, someone who truly believes in the importance of the relationship with Europe. I went to Ukraine 6 times with the vice president because he cared so much about Ukraine. One of the last trips I took with the vice president was to Belgrade and Pristina because he cares about the Balkans. It's in his bloodstream. He's always been someone who goes to the Munich Security Conference. It's in his bloodstream. And so I think Europeans can be confident that they will have in the White House someone who believes deeply in the transatlantic relationship, and who cares about the Balkans as well.
You just mentioned the Balkans, and you know, you were at the White House at the time when all this was happening bad here in the Western Balkans during the Clinton administration, but you also know what was happening in between that. And also, you, as you said, you traveled with the Vice President here to the region. We know that those domestic problems will probably take the first year of a president's term, and he will need to deal with that, and everybody understands that. But what the Balkan can expect from the President Biden, especially Bosnia and Herzegovina, and that duo of Belgrade and Pristina, because that issue is, as you know, unresolved for more than 3 decades now.
Well, you know, I think that there will be a sustained re-engagement with the region and an effort to work more closely with Europe on the Balkans. You know, you got to give some credit to the Trump administration for moving forward on some important issues, the name of North Macedonia and reconciliation with Greece, getting an economic deal between Kosovo and Serbia. That's an important step forward. And now you're seeing, you know, better transportation links and the beginning of movement in the right direction. But there is still a lot of work to do. Economic normalization is not political normalization. And so I think that you'll see the Biden administration focus on that issue, but not do it alone. I don't think it makes any sense for US efforts and EU efforts to run on separate tracks. So I think there'll be more alignment with Europe. And there is an awareness that the situation in Bosnia, Herzegovina is very unsettled, and that more needs to be done to push the country in the right direction. And that's not unrelated to the situation in Kosovo and Serbia. So I do think that, you know, I'm someone who believes that this story will end well, that the entire Balkan Peninsula will eventually be integrated into the European Union and NATO. That seems to me to be very likely. What we don't know is how and when that's going to happen, but I do think that the Biden administration will put a priority on advancing that cause.
Should we expect that the Biden administration will be leading player, or it will be, how I would say, the power behind the scene, the power who pushes and gets in when it needs to, let's say, be that stick instead of a carrot? Maybe European Union will play that role of a carrot, and the United States will play the role of the stick when they need to pressure the leaders here in the region to resolve issues, or they will be the equal players and moving forward like one big machine, which will basically make changes here in the region.
You know, I think that there'll be a duo. It will be a tag team effort where Washington coordinates closely with Brussels and with EU member states and with the UK, now that it has left the EU, to make things happen in the Balkan region. You know, I think that if I were to say where is the most leverage is in Europe. It is the prospect of joining the European Union and getting access to European markets and European security that I think is the most important driver, and NATO as well. So I think that it's important for the process of enlargement in the EU to remain open and to continue moving forward. The US, on the other hand, still has more leverage politically and diplomatically than any other country. And so in that respect, I do think it is important for the United States to be an equal player and to engage in sustained diplomacy. But it's, you know, it's important to keep in mind that Biden will be focused heavily on his domestic agenda, at least in the first year, taming the pandemic, getting the economy open. That doesn't mean he won't have time for Europe or for the Balkans, but it does mean that that folks should expect to see somebody who is very focused on the domestic agenda.
Just to put it simply, we should expect in the first year or first year and a half more Tony Blinken or State Department here in the Balkans rather than to see the president here.
I think that's probably a safe bet. I do expect Biden to convene allies, to participate in a NATO summit, to come to Europe. I guess I probably would not expect him to make a trip to the Balkans in year one, but we'll see. You know, and it's also important to keep in mind that Asia, the rise of China, there will be other calls on his time. And you know, I guess I would say to a European audience that it would be wise for Europeans to come forward with concrete initiatives, whether it is in the Balkans, in the Eastern Med, in Libya, in Nagorno-Karabakh. I think Biden, like Trump and like Obama before him, will be looking to allies to do more. And I don't think that, that it would be unwise for the European Union to say, we're delighted that you won the election, we're happy that you're in office, and we are going to step up to the plate and do more to be a good partner. And here's how we're going to do it.
Here in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and this is my last question about the region before we move to the geopolitical scene, but here in Bosnia and Herzegovina, many are believing that the President Biden will go in to do more when it comes to the reforms of Dayton and the constitution of Bosnia and Herzegovina and everything what's happening here. Should we expect that from the Washington to come, or should be, as you said, the initiative from Brussels and then a support from Washington to be deal with that? Because many here believe that the Dayton's time is over and that we need a new constitution and new constitution of the country.
You know, I think that the view that you just articulated is fairly widely shared, in the sense that, you know, it's now 2021. Dayton has run its course, and it has shown that it has some flaws, and that it has not put Bosnia-Herzegovina in a situation in which there is a clear trajectory towards stability and prosperity and integration into Atlantic institutions. So yeah, I think you're right to say that we need to do a rethink. Given that, you know, constitutional issues are fairly nitty-gritty and will be handled by State Department lawyers and advisors from NGOs, and the International Crisis Group will weigh in, I can see this going forward, even if Biden is not directly and intimately involved. I do think, for example, that if you did get some agreement about constitutional reform, about the next big political steps, that Biden would be available to help seal the deal, just as Trump was available to help seal the deal between Belgrade and Pristina, even though I'm guessing he was not involved in the details. That was left to Rick Grenell. So I do think you will see U.S. participation in the effort that you've outlined, and then the big folks coming in at the end to help close the deal if, in fact, we're close to the finish line.
Now, geopolitical scene, what we should expect from the President Biden when it comes to countries like Russia, China, Middle East. We know what has happened with that Abrahamic accord signed by President Trump, Prime Minister Netanyahu, and leaders of United Arab Emirates, and also what we should expect from United States here in the region of Western Balkans when it comes to countries like China, Russia, and Turkey, which are trying to influence here the region, especially Serbia and Bosnia and Herzegovina?
Well, I think that in the Middle East, I would expect to see continued military pullback coupled with greater diplomatic engagement. That is to say that there is a consensus across the political spectrum that it's time to end the forever wars. That land wars related to the toppling of regimes, they haven't gone particularly well. In fact, if you look at Afghanistan and Iraq and Syria and Libya, the United States has spent upwards of $6 trillion. A lot of lives have been lost, and there isn't a lot to show for it. I think the American people have said, okay, it's enough already. But I do think that what you'll see is more American engagement on the diplomatic front. The Trump administration has been essentially absent on the Eastern Med, doesn't want to touch Libya, has more or less cut itself free from Syria, engaged in Nagorno-Karabakh only at the margins. And so I think that you'll see the Biden administration get much more involved in day-to-day diplomacy, even as it does pull back militarily. And Turkey obviously looms large here, where the relationship between Turkey and the United States has been very troubled. But I do think the Biden administration will see Turkey as an important player and want to try to improve the relationship. On Russia and China, I think the U.S. will take a tough line. Biden is not a big fan of Putin in the way that Trump was. He will speak up about human rights in Russia and China. He will criticize the Chinese on Hong Kong, on Uyghurs in Xinjiang, on other issues in ways that Trump did not. And so I think you can expect a pragmatic but tough approach to both countries. One issue that I'll be watching for is, might there be some way of a breakthrough with the Russians? Might we be able to get some movement on Eastern Ukraine, on Donbass? I don't know the answer to that, but I do think that there will be at least an exploration of an effort to move the relationship forward with China. And that could be part of a strategy to increase balancing against China. And that's because I think there's a view that if the Russians can be pulled a little bit westward and no longer lean so heavily on China, that will increase the pressure on China geopolitically and economically. So that's the overall picture. I expect Biden probably to cancel the withdrawal of U.S. troops from Germany. I expect him to continue to support NATO's enhanced forward presence in the Baltics, in Poland. I think there'll be a continued effort to make sure that NATO has the resources that it needs and that American troops stay put, and that Article 5 is seen as inviolable and sacrosanct. And so I think you'll go back to a situation in which Europeans are no longer questioning whether they can count on the United States to defend its strategic commitments in Europe.
So that probably means that he will also play the same game on a Balkans level as he will play on the geopolitical level and be the strong presence when it comes to the China, Russia, and Turkey here in the region.
Yeah, I mean, it is an ongoing problem. in the sense that because of social media, because of political divisions within the region, because China has the resources to continue to invest in Belt and Road, there will be a Chinese and Russian and Turkish effort to increase influence in the region. I think the best way to counter that influence is to resolve some of the internal divisions that, for example, encourage Belgrade to try to hedge against NATO and hedge against the EU by being nice to the Chinese and the Russians. You know, if we can move forward on normalization between Belgrade and Kosovo, then I think you close the door to the kind of manipulation that we've seen coming from external actors. You know, that's sort of the game that we see. Once Montenegro entered NATO, it was much harder for the Russians to play games. Now that there has been a resolution of the name of North Macedonia, Russia, China, others have less ability to get in, which is one of the reasons that the Russians tried to prevent that outcome from happening. So I don't think there's any way to seal off the region from the influence of Russia and China. But by solving and addressing the internal issues, you make those countries have a much harder time manipulating the politics of the region.
Professor Kupchan, thank you so very much for this interview.
It's my pleasure to join you.
Poštovani gledalci, bio je ovo ekskluzivni intervju sa profesorom Charlesom Kupchanom. Analizirali smo sve ono što slijedi kada je u pitanju Bidenova administracija, ali ono što se trenutno dešava u Sjedinjenim Američkim Državama. Hvala vam na pažnji i ostanite i dalje uz program N1. Doviđenja.